before Ms. Williams got to you, had anyone given her an MRI?
No.
And did you ultimately order one?
I did.
What did you find because of that MRI?
So I ordered the MRI. I don't always order an MRI on a patient with a concussion, especially if they've already had a negative image of some kind. But because of the severity of Ms. Williams' complaints and her symptoms, I went ahead and ordered the better image. So if the CT scan is like a Polaroid picture, then the MRI scan is a great 35 millimeter digital image where you can really see the details in the brain. So for the kind of injuries that you get with a mild traumatic brain injury, it's very uncommon to see any abnormalities on the CT scan. It's not even profoundly common to pick up mild injuries on an MRI scan, so it has to be pretty severe to see anything at all on a scan. So when I did order Ms. Williams' MRI, we found that she had an actual focal brain injury.
Let me stop you there.
Mm-hmm.
What's a focal brain injury? And when you're explaining that, you could also tell the jury what a diffuse brain injury is.
Okay. So just like we talked about how the brain is concussed in trauma, one of the things that happens on a more cellular level is that the lining of all the nerves in the brain is made of myelin. It's a white material that functions just like insulation on a wire. And as that wiring is stretched, as those nerves are stretched, you get little micro breaks in that insulation. And that's what we call diffuse axonal injury. So that stretching causes these little breaks in the myelin, and then it causes sort of diffuse brain dysfunction. That's where we see a lot of the cognitive disturbance, the mood disturbance, is all from this diffuse axonal injury. So that's one type of injury, which I absolutely believe that Ms. Williams had. But in addition to that, we also see a focal injury where in those white matter tracts of the brain, there is an area where the brain is damaged. We can actually see the disruption of that white matter tract. It's a small area that is discretely damaged in Ms. Williams.
Let me pull up something. The jury's already seen this, but go ahead and pull up the digital. So this is a demonstrative exhibit that we've put together for everyone's benefit, and they never let me play with these at home. There we go. What's this image we're looking at here, Doctor?
So the image on the far right of the screen is a slice through Ms. Williams' MRI scan of her brain. And so if you think about how we're looking at these pictures, the MRI scan sort of moves through the brain like this. It's taking slices this way. And so we're kind of looking down into the brain oriented in that direction. And where you see the little red dot that says lacunar infarct, that's actually a focal area of damage in Ms. Williams' brain. And then the blue section that you see, that's more of the fluid-filled spaces in our brain. That's normal. We have those. We have fluid all around the outside, and then we also have fluid on the deep inside of our brain that helps act as a shock absorber. In Ms. Williams, when we got this scan, we could see that there was still some swelling in her brain, which is causing that the sort of parentheses on the far right to be pushed in farther than it should. So when the brain becomes swollen, because fluid is easy to move, the swollen brain pushes into that fluid-filled space and displaces it. That's what you actually see in the parentheses that's facing in your direction.
Lacunar infarct. Two
Yes.
words I don't think we've heard before.
Okay.
Please tell us what that is.
So an infarct is when an area of the brain loses its necessary blood supply and the tissue dies. There's actual local cell tissue death. And the lacunar part means that it's small. So lacunar actually means lake. It's a little area in the brain, whereas when we think about people having strokes, often what we'll see is a large section of brain, 2/3 of one side of the brain affected because a large blood vessel got clogged up and all of that brain tissue died and one arm got weak or someone was unable to speak. Lacunar infarcts are much smaller but can have the same severity of symptoms just depending on where they might be located.
And do you have an opinion as to what caused these problems in Ms. Williams' brain?
I do have an opinion now. Initially, I was concerned that she may have had a stroke entirely unrelated to her accident. I had only seen Ms. Williams a couple of times at that point, and so I needed to get more history on what had happened to her and make sure that she didn't have some underlying factors that would predispose her to having a stroke unrelated to this traumatic event. But as I proceeded through all of that workup, and I did an extremely thorough workup looking for other things that would cause stroke, all of those things were negative. And so the combination of a completely negative stroke workup for other causes, that this was immediately in the period related to her accident, and that we were able to still see the swelling, which means that it had occurred relatively recently, I could only conclude that this focal brain damage was related to the trauma that she sustained in her accident.